Our Way to Wonderful Life message is soul revealing. And each and every one of us must realize that soul is just another word for consciousness. Consciousness. And people say, what is consciousness? Well, our consciousness of prosperity is what we see in our finances and our ways we have with money, and in the experiences that we have with money, I should say. And the way we have the consciousness of loving companionship is in the friendships and the relationships and perhaps our marriage or our relationship with our spouse or our family or our children, whoever. That's our consciousness of relationships. And our consciousness of health is the degree to which we're healthy. Are we conscious that there's a principle of health within us? If we are, then we have the consciousness of health, because that principle of health, which is part of the intelligence of the divine, part of the intelligence of the infinite, can heal us almost instantaneously sometimes when we recognize that we have within us a principle of health that's always responding to that which we believe to be true for us. So if we speak health to our body, we seek loving companionship to our mind, and we let our heart be filled with the joy of feeling prosperous and happy, then things begin to happen in our lives that they're just so marvelous and wonderful that it will surprise us. It will surprise us. We're all more complex than we appear to be, and more than we will probably realize in a single lifetime, and this is a fact and the truth. We're always changing. We're always getting new ideas. We're always becoming aware of more and more things in the world in which we live. And everyone can agree that we live in an infinite universe. Infinite. The week or so ago, I was reading that scientists are discovering hidden planets. Hidden planets. Can you imagine? 40, 50 years ago, people didn't even think about such a thing as a hidden planet. 20 years ago, nobody even thought about what a smartphone was. Everything is always changing, and we're always drawing more from that intelligence, which is part of the infinite good. And so we know that God is always bringing to us, to our awareness, the greater ideas. Now, one of the things that we do to block ourselves, stop ourselves, obstruct our good, is through judgment. It's through judgment. And I've often wondered what it is that causes people to judge other people, especially in a negative way. Apparently, this has been a poison in the mind of mankind throughout history, as even the mastermind Jesus taught that we are not to judge. From the Gospel of Luke, we can read, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." Now, why does he say that? Because if we hold judgment in our mind, then we're going to draw more judgments to us, and we're going to draw judgments about ourselves. And if we condemn other people, then we're going to find something that will draw to us a condemnation, the same as forgiving. We must forgive. Forgive means to give it up. Give it up and know that whatever it was that somebody did, whatever it was that was going on, whatever it was, there's something in us that drew that to us, and as we clear our consciousness of negativity and judgment, then those things go away. We don't have to chase them away. We don't have to fight them or resist them. They just go away. Just as the great Shakespeare tells us in his play Hamlet, "For there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so," and that's a fact. So quit thinking that something's good or bad, and just realize whatever it is, if it's not of God, it will go away all of its own self. It will disappear. It will dissolve. It will cease to be, because only those things of God have a foundation of permanency, a foundation of truth to them to hold them in place. Now, not all judgments are apparent to others, but only to those who hold such judgment. Judgments can be passive and unspoken, but still the effects that they have on the mind and the soul of mankind is not passive at all. Judgments are often revealed not by what is said, but by what is not said. Either way, they are driven by the soul of the individual, and this is a hard truth for many to realize. So hard, in fact, that blame and excuses can become passionately felt when the effects of judgment block the good in an individual's life, and at this point, we want to change, which is the intelligent reaction. So what is it that causes people to blame other people or to make excuses because they're holding something of a negative nature within their mind. If that negative thing wasn't in their own mind, they wouldn't become aware of it in their outer experiences. So we must let ourselves realize everything that is in the universe in which we live is always working to our good, and that if it's not working to our good, it's because we're letting our mind get fastened on things that are not of the truth, that are not of God. And so we take our mind off those things that are not of God, that are not of the good, and we allow ourselves to cleanse our mind of the negativity, cleanse our mind of the obstructions to our greater health, to our greater prosperity, to our greater creative expression, to our greater realization of loving relationships, and we let ourselves become more receptive to our good. Let's look at these words from the great Horatio Dresser. And I don't know how many of you are aware of Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, but he was one of the first people to realize in a greater way that teaching of Jesus that is done unto us as we believe. Because what is that telling us? It means there's a power of our mind that can direct the choices that we make, the thoughts that we make, to create something greater in our life. And so Horatio Dresser studied Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and later he studied Swedenborg and became a teacher of Swedenborg, which was psychology of the mind. And so we know that he has brought us a simple illustration of a greater truth in his book, The Greatest Truth. The Greatest Truth by Horatio Dresser. He writes, "It is clear that we must distinguish between the body and the self or the soul. When we turn from the body, more specifically to the self, we learn that the self is a complex being and demands careful analysis. The fact that we are dissatisfied and wish we might change our disposition shows that there are different aspects of the self. What we complain of is not the full self, but the lower nature. Through these experiences, the higher nature is evolving. The higher nature is evolving. What causes us to complain is the higher nature within us spurring us to development. The lower nature can be changed. It is changing all the time. We may come to consciousness of that change and aid it by idealistic thought. In other words, thinking about our ideals. What is my ideal state of health? We must ask ourselves. What is my ideal state of prosperity? What is my ideal measure of creative expression or success in the work that I do? What does my ideal relationship look like? Because if we can't form an ideal in our mind, then we're not getting the infinite intelligence, the infinite spirit, and the infinite power of God, anything to work with. God cannot respond to something that doesn't exist. So we must have that ideal if we're going to escape those negative things from the world and escape the depressions and escape the stagnation of activity in our mind towards that greater good. So we must open our mind up and think, what is that? What is my ideal? What is my ideal state of health? Very important, because everything else, whether it's our prosperity, whether it's our work, our creative expression, whether it's our relationships, everything develops from health. If we are a healthy person, then our mind will give us ideas of things to do. If we're letting ourselves dwell on the illness, dwell on the sickness, dwell on the infirmity, then our mind is going to be dulled into thinking that we can't do things, that we can't be active. So we must activate our mind first and have a healthy mind. And then a healthy mind creates a healthy body. And a healthy body creates a greater activity, a greater awareness of things that we can do, things that we can be, things that we can have and experience in our lives. Now let's go back to Horatio Dresser. He tells us the profounder question is this: do we really desire to change the higher self? Do we even know what the higher self is, he asks us. The whole question of individuality is involved in the answer. In the ultimate sense of the word, individuality evidently means both one's own most intimately personal self, that is, the true ego, and the divine ideal. The important thing in life is to realize the diviner self in all its fullness. to express it for the good of humanity. Individuality is the center of the soul, center of the soul. It is that which is original in us. It's that image, likeness of God, so to speak. When we pause to consider, we discover that there is nothing we would sooner lose than this higher self. As for changing it, why, it is one's soul. What one really desires is not to change, but more nobly to realize and manifest the soul. When we begin to look at the self from this higher point of view, we learn that a vast amount of time is misspent in the attempt to change the self. We try to make ourselves over, when in reality, there is nothing we would rather be than that which we truly are. There is nothing that we would rather be than that which we truly are. And to understand that statement, we must go back and think about what a toddler is like. You know, a baby comes into the world, and then the baby wants to crawl. Why? The baby wants to see more, wants to feel that, experience that wonder of the universe in which it's been born into. Then after a while, it's no longer satisfied with crawling. It wants to walk. It wants to stand up so it can see more, even more. And sometimes toddlers will want you to hold them because they want to go even higher up so they can see more of the world. When you hold them, you're taking them up to a different level. So the mind, even as the mind of a child, as a baby, going through the toddler stage, is always seeking to become aware of more, become aware of all that's present in the universe around them. And that's why, if we can go back to that sense of wonder about the world in which we live, that sense of curiosity about life, and to realize that we're all living in this mystery, because no one human can ever understand the infinite, can ever embody all that's in the infinite, then we realize that there's always something more for us to become aware of, always something greater that's possible for each of us. So it isn't this trying to make ourselves over that causes us to see in other people that which we have within our own consciousness. Why? Because we can only see in the world what we perceive to be true within our own mind and our own heart and our own soul. And if we're trying to make ourselves over, that means we're not satisfied with ourselves. And if we're not satisfied with ourselves, then we're going to look out into the world with a sense of dissatisfaction, and that dissatisfaction is going to pick up on the things that are unsatisfactory in the world, and often that will draw greater negativity into our mind. The Mastermind Jesus made it less complex, at least for some, when he said, "When you see me, you see the Father." In other words, you see the Spirit, you see the mind of God, your mind reflecting your beliefs, your judgments, your positive thoughts, or your bad attitude, whatever it may be. For God always reflects back to us what we believe to be true, Because that belief that we have that something is true will draw it into our awareness in a greater way. So if we're believing in negative things, our mind is so focused on all the bad news and all the crises in the world and all the violence and the wars and the hatred and the racism and the anti-Semitism and the homophobia and this person against that person, then we're going to fill our mind with so much confusion and so much negativity that it's going to be hard to live a good life. Hard to even think about life as something wonderful and beautiful, because we won't find any satisfaction in living. No satisfaction in living. So let's go back to Horatio Dresser. He tells us there is a sense then in which we can change our disposition, that means our attitudes, our awareness, and change them most effectively. One's disposition is one's way of thinking and acting. Bring the higher self more into play, and new habits will be formed. A person of a nervous, excitable disposition may become, in a few years, unusually calm and moderate. The change does not come about by working on the nervousness and trying to calm it, but by cultivating inner peace, poise, and equanimity. In other words, balance. Best of all, the development of a wiser philosophy of life is accompanied by peace of mind. Peace of mind. It is remarkable what changes may be wrought by persistence in the wiser direction. Some who have changed themselves from restless, excitable persons to moderate, well-poised individuals find it difficult to persuade people that they were once entirely lacking in poise. So we must know and we must understand that once we find in our mind that greater peace of mind, that peace that surpasses all understanding, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us to reimagine what we were like before. And it's very difficult for people who find that consciousness of peace of mind within us, that poise within us, to think that we could ever have been without it. You know, at the City of Angels Church, which would get 2,000 to 3,000 people on a Sunday, Dr. O.C. Smith had in the lobby, he had a prayer request card so that people could fill out this card to ask for prayer. And one would think that, especially in Los Angeles, which is so expensive to live in, that people would have been asking for prayers for money or prosperity or for greater success or that their stocks would rise higher in value or whatever. But the people predominantly ask, he told me, for peace of mind. They ask for prayer for peace of mind. We want to be at peace with our health. We want to be at peace with our finances, at peace with our relationships, at peace with our work, at peace with who we are and what we're about. And when we find ourselves at peace, then those greater things still, those ideas to do and accomplish and be that greater thing still will come into our mind. Let's go back to Horatio Dresser. It says, finally, the discovery that we can change our disposition means that selfishness is not unconquerable. We all have it. We're always looking out for the self-preservation. Everybody knows that selfishness will yield if one will make the effort. There is no excuse for taking this part of ourselves as we find it. Before each of us, there is a spiritual ideal, and no one knows how far or how high the endeavor to realize the ideal may carry the soul. Just as in a democratic country, it is always possible for people in the common walks of life to rise into power, so in the spiritual universe, there is always room at the top, always room at the top. There is a more or less fixed individuality within each and every one of us. But even this may be subject to change, because we know that in the Scriptures it identifies this as the image and the likeness of God. But we know that we're always drawing to the measure of our faith, to the measure of our realization of that image and that likeness, something either more or less of what that image and likeness is. So we know that as our faith gives us a greater feeling of being in the presence of God and that God is always working everything towards our good, that our life is lifted up into a greater feeling of being alive and with a greater feeling of enthusiasm for life. But we know that if we don't allow ourselves to draw more from the Spirit, then we start feeling the depressions and we start feeling the separation from the good. At any rate, Horatio Dresser tells us, no man fully knows himself as yet. No man or woman fully knows themselves as yet. Meanwhile, the most rational procedure is to assume that we are practically modifiable without limit. In other words, we can change without limit. No one can hope too much or dare too much in a universe where perfection is the ideal, where the Christ Spirit is ever ready to uplift, and where the grace of God enables every man and woman to grow in grace. The grace of God enables every man and woman to grow in grace. Now, that's the truth for all of us, the truth for everyone. So what is our soul revealing to us? That is a question each of us must answer for ourselves. As we focus in our mind on our ideals and cultivate patterns of thoughts within that foster a greater realization of the immensity of our ability to create our greatest joys yet, we shall find ourselves loosing from our mind those thoughts and beliefs that previously hindered our receptivity to the greater things still that are ours to experience. We shall see in others the incredible spirit that we feel within our own soul. our soul revealing the evolving transformation that is being awakened at the deepest level of our being. In other words, we're coming into that awareness, that consciousness that when you see me, you see the Father, just as Jesus said. And Father, I know that you heareth me always. He said, and the Father, he tells us, is spirit. So the Father, I know that you heareth me always, closer to us than breathing. And we don't disbelieve in the law of gravity, even though we know that gravity is invisible and we can't see it, hear it, feel it, taste it, or touch it, although I guess we can feel it in a way. So let's not disbelieve in the power and the presence and intelligence of God being available right where we are either. Let's get all that stuff out of our mind that holds us, that prejudices us against the good, and let the good reign supreme in our mind. Let's look at these final words from Horatio Dresser. He says, there are few discoveries in regard to the human mind of more consequence than the revelation which shows the power of prejudice. Some might say that it is more important to become aware of the power of fear or to awaken to the influence and scope of suggestion. But sometimes a person's prejudices are far more deeply rooted than their fears, and to show them the power of suggestion, you must show them that their life is narrowed by their preconceptions. One may be aware of fear and may be valiantly at work to overcome it, but the peculiarity of a prejudice is that one is unconscious of it. To discover that one is prejudiced is forthwith to see that in respect and question, one stands absolutely in one's own light. In other words, let's not be prejudiced against anything. Let's open our mind and be receptive to the truth that God is working all things to our good. All things to our good. And let ourselves become enthusiastic with that thought. Let's realize once and for all that God so loved us, that God has given each and every one of us a part of God's intelligence, a part of God's power, a part of God's spirit, that God has created us in God's own image and likeness. God intelligence has formed our spirit in human form so that we can find our way to express this life in the greatest way possible, to realize this beautiful experience on planet Earth, and to go beyond anything that the world has thought before, felt before, believed before about our relationship with God. So let's let our soul reveal that we're on a journey, a persistent, committed journey to realize more and more of the good, the more and more of God, and to glorify God in our life in the most wonderful way. And let's realize that the glory of God is present in our health, in our prosperity, present in all things that concern us, in our relationships, in our work, in our success, in our creative expression. Let's open ourselves up and loose all negativity, loose all judgment, loose all prejudice, loose all things that obstruct us, block us, stop us from realizing the kingdom of God is within us, not low here or low there, just as the Mastermind Jesus said. And so it is. Amen. Once again,